Hello everyone, big episode today for the Chirp. Today is our 20th episode, and I thought that for this week, instead of having a new guest on, we would take some time to appreciate some of our awesome guests that have come on before and what specifically I have learned as a host. We started the Chirp back in September 2021 with the aim of hearing some amazing stories of how relationships between loved ones can be affected by money and by loans, how people can make mistakes in these scenarios, and how they learn from these mistakes as well moving forward. You know, I was hired by the co-founder of Pigeon Loans, Brian Bristol, to come in and build out this podcast and interview all of these amazing people. And let me tell you, I was no behavioral psychologist, I was no personal finance expert, I was just a normal guy looking to learn, much like you listening or watching right now. And this has been a huge learning experience for me, talking to all of these successful people, entrepreneurs, expats, content creators, all with stories of financial struggle and how they all asked for help with money. And during the last 19 episodes, you know, I've noticed some patterns, some similar types of stories that have kept coming up over and over again, because these are all human beings that I'm chatting to. Whether people grow poor, rich, alone, or with family, we all have the same needs when it comes to money. And whether these stories are positive or negative, I find them refreshing because this podcast is here to educate you. And our guests have come out on the other side after witnessing and living through some financial hardship. So there would be no Chirp without our guests. So this episode is also for you. Thank you for all the great stories. I wish I could play them all. Unfortunately, this episode would be too darn long. So I've chosen my favorite clips from the last 19 episodes that I feel were most educational for me, embody the mission of the podcast, embody the mission of the Chirp, and that I believe also are very entertaining. So starting off, I want to talk about one of the main themes that I hear from our guests, which is divorce. You know, marrying your soulmate doesn't always work out, and the financial implications of that can be quite tough. So let's go back to episode 1 with Daniel Cruz, CEO of Wash B&B, who tells us about his own personal experience.
Yeah, so I went through a divorce after moving to Milwaukee, and the house was part of it, and it was something that it needed to happen for a while, and it wasn't like this, bad, terrible thing. But financially, it was definitely a challenge. Was going through a period where I kind of left my career field in 2014, wanted to take some time off, had done some consulting and freelancing, but really I was burned out, and I didn't really know that at the time, so I wasn't performing super well in the freelance jobs I was taking because I was distracted by just being burned out and not wanting to do a lot of work, and traveling and learning and do a whole bunch of other things, catching up on all the stuff that you can't do while you're working, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, like we do in this, like we tend to do in this country. And so going through that divorce process, there was things to just, sort of separate and divide. And my ex had always made a lot more money than me. And she came from sort of a wealthier family. And so there was this natural tension that, hey, here's this guy that doesn't really want to work and doesn't want to make a lot of money. It kind of drove our decision to move to Milwaukee was we can have a great quality of life for a very low cost compared to San Francisco, and let me find the time to like figure out what I'm going to do with my next couple of steps career wise. And that created just a ton of tension. And so finally we decided that, hey, let's separate things out. And we try to do that in a pretty amicable way. And eventually like some agreements fell apart, and then it just goes this crazy thing. I don't have, a lot of liquid cash. It's tied up in divorce proceedings. I need to buy the house from her. And I need to figure out like where that money can come from, from a bank loan, from the lender of the house that, because we did a land contract for the house. So there's all these like documents, there's divorce proceedings, there's a land contract for a house. There's my parents who are willing to help me like sort of assist get through this transition. So I can refinance the house. So it's just this massive issue. And that issue was like this $30,000-$40,000 between my ex and I around the house. And if I wasn't able to secure that, I probably would have been forced to sell the house. And just by the nature of how everything worked out, I wasn't able to like get a bank instantly. Like the timelines weren't working out. So I needed to get money at one point. I needed to basically reassure her that I was going to get this money to her in a timely fashion. So that's one loan she's basically giving to me. Then I need to get the money to satisfy that loan, but I needed to create a new loan for that. and then I need to go to a bank and then get a new loan to like satisfy that. So there's like 3 layers here, and only one has an official process, right? And that's getting a loan from a bank.
Next, let's hear from Vicky Wouche, a financial strategist who came out of a bad divorce and also used her mathematical skills to become an expert in managing money.
When I first met my first husband, or now my ex-husband, very naive. I had come from a family where we didn't talk about money, but I was aware of my mum's ability to save and to plan, because when we had a holiday, she would buy things in advance for the holiday and stack it all up. And I think I've either got I don't know, like a genetic maths skill, or if it's not nature, it's nurture, a nurtured understanding of money and planning and budget from observing my mum, but none of it was conscious. So I go into this relationship, initially move into, at that time, my boyfriend's rented accommodation. So of course he was paying all the bills, so that when we got married and we bought our own house with a mortgage, I just assumed that he was paying all the bills again. And that is the biggest mistake you can make in any relationship or anything to do with money, is to assume. Never assume. Understand absolutely everything. And in the very first house we were in, it turned out we hadn't been paying the mortgage. Don't know why, just didn't. And then my husband lost his job, and then we couldn't pay the mortgage. And we managed to sell that house out from under the repossession. We then got into a second property, and in this second property, somehow did the same thing again. And I look back at myself and I want to shake me or slap me and go, what were you doing? What were you doing, Vicky, when this was going on? Well, part of one of the things I was doing was breeding and growing our baby. And the second time we were repossessed, I was 7 months pregnant. And that caused me to have, preeclampsia, high blood pressure, and our baby was born early. And I left one house literally with packing boxes, because we couldn't get rehoused until we were actually evicted. An eviction means all your possessions have to go on the actual common pavement where people walk outside the property, because they want you off the property before you can get something else. And somehow, in the miracle of the 10 days I was in hospital with high blood pressure and everything, my now ex-husband managed to find a rental property and we moved in. So I left one house and then arrived at another house with a new baby. And we were bringing that child into a house that was bankrupt, that was repossessed, that was in loads of debt. We had some family friends helping us out. But outwardly, if you hadn't been the person I'd asked to borrow money off of, we were having great holidays. We had a great car. We had the mobile phones. We would still go out for meals. So the trappings were all there. And that's really where sort of ego comes into it and plays a role in the story.
Now, Dan Narciso, an expert in litigation finance, tells a super awkward story about his friend who bought a house with his partner, only for things to, needless to say, go awry.
Yeah, so I've seen divorces come to it. One funny story is, this doesn't really go off the work-life balance thing, but someone just kind of being done with their money. I had a buddy of mine. He owned his own house. He got engaged. Right. And then he ended up putting the property, while he owned the property, he put the title in her name as well. And then they went 5 or 6 years through the engagement. And then she got sick of it and kind of ended the engagement, but she was still in title of the deed.
Yeah.
So they were living together while they were broken up. And he ended up losing half the house after 2 years because of that mistake. So he's fine now, but he still lost half his house just because he decided to just put your house in someone else's name for vanity's sake. Exactly.
Yeah. And I suppose, why do you think that is? Obviously, if they had gotten married, would there have been like worse implications in terms of, obviously there would be alimony and things like that, but do you think that he just simply jumped the gun, as in he essentially put his girlfriend on the lease of the house instead of what he thought was his future wife? Wasn't practical.
Yeah. No, yeah. I don't think he ever wanted to get married. I think he got engaged because she kind of said, "Hey, we've been dating for a few years now. We need to get engaged." And he was like, "Okay." And then she was living there, so he put her on the deed of the house. But it's it's one of those things where he bought it beforehand, so it technically is not marital property once you get married. So he could have technically kept the apartment to himself even if he got married.
Yeah.
But the fact that he went another 5 years without getting married, and then got separated, and then she was living in the house and bringing like guys over to the house because that was our house. They were just like roommates. Overall, not a great situation for him.
No.
So.
And he stayed there as well.
Yeah, he stayed there.
He stood his ground.
There. Yeah, he didn't. Yeah. He didn't move. He was like, I paid for this house. I'm not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So then ended up having to sell the house.
Entrepreneurs, startup founders, and CEOs have all featured heavily on the Chirp as guests, and for good reason. These individuals know what it's like to live frugally. The early days of starting a company are not where you get to live your best life. It's an uphill battle financially, and sometimes you need to know when to ask for help. So first, let's hear from Chris Daniels, founder of the Shrimp Society, about one of his first entrepreneurial ventures, a lawn mowing business, and how a family loan can be done right.
Right when I turned 16, I got like this old truck. And I wanted to pay it off, right, and start like making money and things like that. And so kind of the precursor to Mulch Maniacs was this business called Morning Dew. And I wanted to get a riding mower, right, like one of these nice riding mowers, because I was like, hey, I need to be efficient. I'm cutting 10 lawns in my neighborhood. Yep. And I was just wanted to drive this thing through the neighborhood and blah, blah, blah. And so it was like $2,000. I had, didn't have that money. I think I had $100 to my name, I was 16. And I remember I asked my dad, and my two, my grandpas on either side, very, like business orientated, entrepreneurial people. My dad, not at all. He's a doctor and just not a business guy, right? He doesn't like it. And so he's like, okay, well, come, pitch me, present something. So literally went into the living room, formal pitch, the whole 9 yards, printed out everything and asking for this $2,000 loan. And I think the interest rate was like 10%. And I think it was supposed to be paid back in 6 months, right? Because I had my whole financial projection of we're going to cut lawns, make this profit, blah, blah, blah. And we signed the contract. We wrote it up. It was a, Word document and everything. And it was I really like looking back on that. I appreciate how like kind of formal that he made that versus just like, hey dad, can I borrow $2,000, right? Like, no, he kind of made me earn it, right? Like, and like, let's be serious about it, and there's consequences and things like that. And I thought that was great. And so anyway, we go, and it was a fun moment. We went and bought the lawnmower and all that stuff. And then I remember like a week later, we needed a trailer because the business was expanding, and I had to go to another neighborhood. So again, I had to go back in kind of the Shark Tank pitch room and pitch them on another loan for a like $850 trailer, and then we added that to the contract, and that went through and paid everything back. And so that was kind of the start of it. And I think that having that base of like family or friends, we can get into a ton of other stories, taking out bigger loans for family and friends, stuff like that for businesses, but specifically around, entrepreneurship. It's interesting because, that's really how it starts, is someone's going to lend you money based on kind of your character and the fact that you're going to deliver, and they know you, right? And I see like all these people in the kind of venture capital world raising like millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Or millions of dollars, and doing it over Zoom calls. They don't know the people. And in the early days, it's really when you're trying to go 0 to 1, that $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 is huge. And who's going to be the first people you ask? The people around you that trust you and that, you trust them and things like that.
Josh Barker, CEO of City Innovation Labs, knows what it's like to start again in business. And when you go back to square one, certain luxuries are no longer on the table. And again, we see family come to the rescue.
I can tell you all sorts. And then, it's a great assumption to say that I was very financially stable and I had no money problems. And right, I think
Excuse my assumption.
no, you're good. I mean, I think that's the whole purpose of this, though, right? Is the whole purpose of you on Pigeon Loans is breaking down a lot of those barriers of people being open and honest with like, I can be real with like how things happen. I mean, because the origin
Yeah,
story of
please do.
how City Innovations started is not something I talk about a lot. I don't think entrepreneurs do. I don't think enough focus. The analogy I give is like, and I like to see is you've seen those motivational posters where you're like, I don't know, they're like perseverance, and it's like a guy climbing a mountain or something. Like, well, one of them is like that I've seen that I really resonate with is like failure, and so or success. That's probably better. It's a
Hmm.
success, and then it's a picture of this iceberg, and underneath the water is the failure, and all people see is the top of the iceberg, right? So it's
Yeah,
like,
the tip. Yeah.
so that's the thing is like you looked at my resume and you started out with like, oh, it's a really impressive resume, and it's like, but I mean, there was tons of failures to get to that point, and so
Yeah.
going back to your question of like, uh, what was that process and what did it look like? I remember when I left KPMG, and one of the things that I was very I had a very cushy job, and I said, I know I'm going to have to make sacrifices. And as I moved over, one of the things that I looked to do was to see if I could maintain the same lifestyle. And that's impossible. When you're going from a very cushy, large company to a startup, a lot of sacrifices had to
Yeah.
be made. And so my wife and I made big, took a big pay cut, right? It was over a 50% pay cut, to go work at a startup. And so, but I mean, obviously there's risk and there's reward. So we looked at the reward and we're like, okay,
Of
the
course. Yeah.
outcome of this could be a good thing. But where that led to was, I remember distinctly, there was a season of, uh, we were going through, it was in the winter, middle of winter in Michigan, mind you, which is freezing. If you don't know Michigan weather, it's freezing, and it's, and I remember, my furnace broke. And in that moment, my furnace broke. I looked at the bank account because we made cuts in all these areas. You have to also make lifestyle cuts, right? And so
Yeah.
it was about a couple years in, and we had been putting things on credit cards because we couldn't make it, with just the salary cuts and all that stuff. So we were trying to keep reducing. And so I looked at that and I was like, my furnace broke. I've got these credit cards, and I'm sitting here going, and I have no way of paying for this furnace that broke. I don't have the savings we put into the business. We put, and so
Hmm.
I'm sitting here over leveraged as an entrepreneur. And this is a story that people don't tell with entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
And so you
Mm.
look at it and you go, what am I going to do? And I literally was on my knees, like praying. I'm like sitting here going, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so it ended up being, the next day, my brother took me out to breakfast and he's like, what do you need? And I was like, honestly, man, I don't know what I need. I just need you to pray for me, and he's like, how about
Yeah.
I just give you $5,000? I'll loan it to you. Right. And so this
Nice.
is where, Pigeon Loans comes in, because I mean, those early stories of even entrepreneurs like myself, who you look at it and you go, Matt, you could say I'm successful, you could say I'm mediocre, you could say whatever you say is like, or whatever it appears I am, like it's really different, a different story underneath for almost anyone. That's
Yeah.
true, right?
And finally, I loved chatting to Pigeon Loans co-founder Caben Clausen. Caben speaks about his father's financial struggle in 2008 and how that debt shaped his outlook on what he wants his company, Pigeon Loans, to achieve for their customers.
It's funny you say that, because I think one of the huge secret hidden pains that's facing millions of people all over the world is they're walking around with a giant weight on their shoulders. I'm imagining like a backpack that's got rocks in it,
Yeah.
and that's their debt. And I've been in some credit card debt before, not a lot, but enough to where it was like, it kind of is weighing on your subconscious, because deep down inside, you kind of feel like you're, just to be real, I'd almost feel like a net negative on society. When you're a negative, when your capital is literally negative, it can feel that way. It can feel
Yeah.
like, am I valuable? And that to me is one of like the truly heartbreaking things that a lot of people are facing, because so many young Americans were really not taught in our upbringing and our schooling a lot of practical financial matters. When I went out and took out my student loans, Cameron, I had no freaking idea what these interest rates meant, payment periods, what would this mean for my life. I was thinking it's such a near termism where I was like, I need to go to college. College is a cool place to go. I'll meet fun people. It sounds great. And I think people are doing that again and again. So I think debt is this weight that's weighing on a lot of Americans, certainly. And then you brought up shame. And I think shame is such an important word because I think in some ways this is uniquely, maybe not uniquely American, but certainly an American problem. And the problem is America was built on this immigrant mindset of pick yourself up by your bootstraps. You can go from rags to riches. You can become anybody. You can be Barack Obama and then become president of the United States.
American dream.
The American dream. You can grow up poor and become rich. And I think whether it's my father, myself, certainly stereotypically this is more common in men than women probably, there's this self-sufficiency we all want to have where going to someone to ask them for money, it's, I think in America, often shameful. I think one thing we need to reverse is we need to reverse that. I've even talked to customers of Pigeon in the last couple of weeks who've told me I've taken high interest rate loans that were a bad financial decision because I literally didn't have the courage to let a friend know that I was doing badly. So they took out a loan, which is a way worse financial decision, right? In the payday lending world, it can be a 400% interest rate, which is insane. So reversing that, Cameron, I think is one of the biggest goals of Pigeon. Make going to people who love you, who care for you, the first place you go to look for help, as opposed to the bank or payday lender who they're just trying to make a profit and there's no actual incentive for them to, get you out of debt even necessarily.
Unique stories are one of my favorite things about the Chirp, and I love when a guest comes on and gives me a story to really chew on, to really get me thinking. And Keith Moore, aka Mr. Credit Banking, is a content creator who shares tips and tricks on how best to handle your personal finance. He's on all social media platforms and YouTube. And speaking about his own story, living paycheck to paycheck, is a really inspirational story on how to improve your situation by educating yourself and then educating others based on your experience.
So a few years ago, probably about 6 years ago, I lost my job. And I lost my job on my birthday. Congratulations, happy birthday. You have no more job. And which was a horrible thing for me. And that was an eye opener for me because up until then, I've always had a very good paying job, but I lived paycheck to paycheck. And so, I would get paid on Friday, and by Monday I was broke again. But for me, it wasn't a big deal because I got paid weekly. So basically, 5 days later, hey, I would have another paycheck. So, I survived. On the outside, nobody could tell that I was really struggling because every 7 days I had a paycheck. So anyway, so when I got laid off, I didn't learn my lesson. I continued to live my regular life like I did have a paycheck. Anyways, and so I was surviving off of unemployment. Well, unemployment was basically half of what I was making. And so I could not make my mortgage payment. I could pay all my other bills, but I could not make my mortgage payment. And the other bad thing that I did is I did not have any type of emergency fund. I didn't have any type of savings. I had nothing. I was truly living paycheck to paycheck. So I just stopped paying my mortgage. And for the 3 months I didn't have a job, it was 3 months of not paying my mortgage. So guess what? So when I finally got my job, 3 months at my new job, 3 months later, I am 3 months behind on my mortgage. And I was like, wow, I'm in a mess here. So I had to come up with a plan. And it took me about 6 months or so to come up with a plan on how was I going to get, caught up in my mortgage. And so basically I got a side hustle. I got a job as an Amazon delivery driver, and that was going to help me get caught up on my mortgage. And it took me about 2 years to do that. So in those 2 years, I have another 24 late payments. Although I wasn't falling behind, it took me 2 years to get caught up. And the reason why it took that long, because life is still happening, emergencies are still happening, all these things are happening whilst I'm still trying to get caught up. And in between that, I had a car that I was using to do the delivery, to be a delivery driver for Amazon. And that car, because I was using a lot, making deliveries for Amazon, it would break down a lot. And so I still didn't really learn my lesson as it comes to personal finance. So whenever the car would break down, I just whip out one of my credit cards and repair it, and I was on my way. And I didn't really, worry about paying the bill. I just made the minimum payments on that on my credit card bill. So, over those 2 years it's taken me to pay off to get caught up on my loan, I maxed out those credit cards. And then just my bad luck, guess what? The car broke down. So I have a maxed out credit card that doesn't work, and I'm slowly getting caught up on my mortgage. Things can't get any worse. So then I go to the car dealership and it says, here I am. I have a broken car. I'm behind in my mortgage and I have maxed out credit cards. Hey, can you guys give me a loan to get a car? And they said, sure, let me run your credit, 14 times, which I did not know that they were going to do. I thought, hey, I signed for them to run my credit. They ran it, I thought they were running it once, but I come to find out afterwards, they ran it like 14 times to find me a better deal. So they
Right.
ran my credit 14 times. The good thing is I did leave the car dealership with a new car, but unfortunately my credit got ran 14 times. So even made my credit even worse. And on the old car that broke down, I still owed $6,000. So now I have a payment from the old car for $6,000, and then the new car 17,000. I'm even more debt. My credit is even worse. I'm behind in my mortgage. It's a mess.
Mm.
So I had to say, oh gosh, I got to find a way how to get out of this. So, and that's around the time I says, hey, I got to do something differently. I started doing more and more and more research on YouTube, on the internet. And that's also around the time when I started my YouTube channel. And I started getting serious, creating a budget, paying off my bills, and so forth. And at the same time, whilst I'm create my content for my YouTube channel, I'm doing research and I'm paying off my bills.
And last, but certainly not least, Rahima Wright, CEO of Shea Aline, tells me about her time in Ghana and the excellent susu system that the women of the community have there.
No, that's a great question. And what I observed is that for the most part, the women that were in the communities and in the cooperatives that we were partnering with were head of household. There is
Yeah.
a common practice of polygamy. And so even though they might be married, their husbands might not be living in the homes with them because they have multiple wives.
Right.
And also the financial burden of caring for multiple families.
Mm.
So I honestly saw frequently a woman would be in charge of her household. She'd be the one taking care of the kids and trying to figure out, how to pay for their needs. And so part of the reason too that this issue or this misconception that, men are going to get upset or, have jealousy or not want their wives to make any money. I just never saw that. And I'm sure it exists. Of course, I
Yeah.
don't know every single family. I'm sure it exists, but for the ones that I saw firsthand, I did not see that challenge or issue. And so when you talk about this relationship with money and how it shows up in the community, the other reality is when women have increased access to income, it's been proven by studies that it improves the entire community. And so there's this very special relationship and opportunity to address systemic issues by
Yeah.
financially empowering women. And so, that relationship is closely tied to when a woman has money, she's 100% investing that money in her children. She's
Yeah.
trying to figure out how they can get to a better school, how she can pay for better nutrition for them, giving them access to health services. And I will also give an example of how the women in our cooperatives, they have, they call them susus. And essentially, it is a community savings and lending program. And so that
Wow.
increased income also trickles to other people in the community. And so if you're part of the susu and you put money into the pot, it rotates in terms of who has access to that pot. And because the communities are so small, there's a responsibility to deliver. So you can't take money from the pot and like not pay it back when you're supposed to. So there's a certain level of trust already that is built into that community. And so when we see our women in the community, in the cooperatives that we work with, when they get that 5 times multiplier, it's not only affecting their household, but it affects other households in the community.
So those are all my favorite clips of the Chirp thus far. Again, I wish I could have played them all, but we would be here all day. My main takeaways of the last 19 episodes are as follows. Family is so important when it comes to loans. While it can sometimes lead to arguments and awkwardness, there is no better support structure available for those who need financial help. Secondly, systems are essential when it comes to paying loans back. Unless you're willing to part ways with your money, comfortable with the fact that you may never see it again, you lending money without a system in place is just a recipe for disaster. And finally, loans are imperative to aspiring entrepreneurs. Whether it's for your business or just to feed yourself, it's extremely difficult to be a successful entrepreneur without, again, asking for help. So I want to finish by saying thank you to all who listen and watch The Chirp. While we've 20 episodes in the books, we have no plans of slowing. We want to continue to bring you compelling educational conversations from professionals who have made mistakes so that you don't have to make them. And thank you again to all of our amazing guests who have come on the show so far. No doubt some will be back again, and I can't wait to bring you even more amazing interviews. So as always, if you want to join me on The Chirp and tell your own story, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk. And that's all for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode. And until then, I hope you all stay safe and enjoy your summer. Thank you all so much thus far. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.